Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar on accelerating CCUS uptake through development in clusters and hubs. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some housekeeping items. So we're using the ON24 platform today. For those not familiar with it, everything you see on your screen is resizable. You can expand the presentation slide to full screen. To ask questions, which we encourage you do, please use the Q&A window, which should be on the left-hand side of your screen. We'll be holding a dedicated Q&A session later on. For a smooth viewing experience, we recommend closing any programs or browsers running in the background. The session is recorded, and a link will be shared with all participants automatically after the session. So before we start, this webinar is hosted by SP Gaia, OGCI, IOGP, and IPECA. My name is Darryl Martin, and I'm the Climate and Fuels Manager at IPECA. Very briefly, for those who are not familiar with IPECA, IPECA is the Global Oil and Gas Association for advancing environmental and social performance across the energy transition. We were founded in 1975 at the request of UNEP to develop a shared industry response to environmental and social issues. And today, we remain the industry's principal channel for engagement with UNEP. IPECA has been working on CCS for a long time, holding our first workshop in 2003. Since then, we've been sharing knowledge and good practice around the suite of technologies related to CCS, understanding how these technologies can support the goal of the Paris Agreement. As you can see on the right-hand side, we've held a number of webinars in this series on a range of topics from carbon take-back obligations to negative emissions technologies. The full series can be found on the related content window. So today we're going to focus on cluster and hubs projects. So CCUS clusters and their associated hubs are essential to secure the future of emissions-intensive industries. A CCUS cluster network brings together multiple carbon dioxide emitters and/or multiple storage locations using shared transportation infrastructure. To start this session, we'll have Ian McDonald in his role of OGCI's CCUS workstream lead to share some insights from OGCI's CCUS hub. Next, we'll have Aslak Helstow, business advisor at Northern Lights, to share an overview and updates on recent developments at the Northern Lights project. And last but not least, Arthur Lee, Chevron Fellow and Principal Advisor, and also the CCS Task Force Chair at IPECA, will moderate the Q&A session, so please feel free to use the Q&A function at any time for discussion with our wonderful speakers today. And with that, I'll pass over to Ian.
Thank you very much, Darryl, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So as Darryl said, I'm presenting on behalf of OGCI. Those not familiar with OGCI, it's a gathering of 12 of the larger oil and gas companies in the world, a couple of NOCs as well as IOCs. And together, it's all CEO action-led items looking at climate initiatives. There is a climate fund established through climate investments that is now moving forward by itself under steerage of Pratama, who you will probably have been aware of through OGCI, and now the OGCI XCOM and our work streams is sort of moving ahead itself as well. You can see the 12 member companies at the bottom there, and they're all represented in the work stream that I lead and contribute to the work throughout that I'll be presenting. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So the real thing about OGCI is that all the companies have to be sort of accepting of the Paris Agreement and working towards the Paris Agreement. And what OGCI brings is that it's a voluntary sort of commitment, but it's also trying to stretch our member companies to look at ambitious targets and really understand where we can add, in addition to all the other players that are already out there. Darryl mentioned this is a cooperative thing between IOGP, IPECA, and others, SPE. So where can OGCI position itself that there's a potential gap in the market for work to be done in the climate initiatives arena? And that's where we're sort of pushing ahead, trying to deliver some of those work. We're moving now more towards action orientated. We've had a good establishment, baseline data gathering, and lots of work and reports produced, and now we're trying to move that into more the action orientated. And we focused in 6 main areas. CCS being one, CCUS being one, but also methane, which is the role of gas. You may have heard about our methane intensity targets, etc. And the others include our transportation work stream, energy efficiency, low emission opportunities, and natural climate solutions or nature-based solutions, depending on how you view that lever in the decarbonisation. But all working really well together and advancing the 12 companies' targets and ambitions. I'm trying to move the slide. There we go. So OGCI, we had a strategy refresh a few years ago, really focusing on 3 key areas that all the CEOs signed up to. And that was one, trying to get our own operations to net zero and to leverage as much as possible the sort of joint operated ventures that where we have that influence. And we seen basically we wanted a carbon intensity of about 17 kilograms per CO2 equivalent for barrel of oil, and the methane we wanted to get well below the intensity of 0.2%. And certainly the methane intensity is already below that. And we see that we can gather this by doing all these actions will allow us to achieve about 1 gigaton prize. Expanding that to the wider oil and gas industry and sharing our learnings or our knowledge, really we see that again as being able to scale up our efforts and to really that whole industry we can see as about a 3 gigaton of CO2 prize there. But of course, it's not just our scope 1 and scope 2 that are important. There's also about how to decarbonize society effectively, or looking potentially at our scope 3, and really we're looking at about a 16 gigaton prize there. And really we're sort of focusing on hydrogen and CCS to help us deliver that in the long run. So that's the sort of high level strategy refresh we've had at OGCI. So what work are we doing, and how have we performed so far? So some of you who may remember back in 2019, OGCI kickstarted some CCS hubs. We announced 5 around the world, and we wanted to basically start to influence policymakers to say, if we're going to develop CCS, we need to start thinking about doing it through these hubs and clusters, because we can see massive savings on the costs on driving CCS down. We needed some first wins on these projects, therefore we need to make them most cost efficient as possible, and that basically means gathering those CO2 sources together and storing them in potentially already proven reservoirs such as depleted reservoirs or saline aquifer if appropriate. However, in the last 4 years since we kicked that off, you can see the number of actual hubs around the world that have now been created and produced with member company involvement. And globally, there's even more than this, which is really encouraging that we've really seen this hub and cluster. And OGCI wasn't the first entity. We won't be sort of trying to claim credit for that. But the hub and cluster sort of push has really been helped. Everyone's getting behind it, and really governments are seeing the benefit of doing that. And down the right-hand side here, I have some characteristics of a hub. I mentioned here that really the early engagement between the governments and the industry is vital, and also bringing in the local other stakeholders such as NGOs and the actual public that live around the area to explain to them the actual value of CCS, not only to the government but to the local people. And actually there is not just a cost per se, there's real value to doing CCS to achieving net zero emissions. It's also very beneficial for countries and corporates to have net zero emission targets. That allows us to sort of frame CCS, because CCS is one of the more expensive and typically seen as utilizing on hard to abate, but other industries are possible as well. And then also we were talking about the shared infrastructure, again, driving the costs down there through that shared pipeline and storage resources. Another aspect would be that effectively when we start off the hubs, we might normally see 1, 2, or maybe 3 emitters coming together to form the anchor tenants. Those are the ones that will be able to guarantee those first CO2 offtake to the transport and storage network. It may be operated by one of those entities, but just allowing that to kickstart the industry. Looking at potentially rather low cost CO2 capture sometimes, not always, but then being able to expand that to the neighboring community and the neighboring industrial users so that we can effectively start to oversize to begin with, bearing in mind there's actually that would really benefit the other emitters around us that could contribute their CO2 in the long run. And we're looking at CO2 coming from all types of sources. It has its issues with this because obviously the CO2 quality needs to be sort of a standard of a good quality so that we can inject and compress it and not have any issues in the subsurface. But CO2 can come from so many different sources out there, whether it's process orientated from the oil and gas to chemicals, refining, manufacture, cement. And finally, what's been really interesting in the last 12 to 18 months has been the upsurge of interest in things like DACs and BECs, or so-called carbon removals, really driving that forward. Very interesting. But this all needs some defined business models, and they need to be supported by these attractive policy frameworks that government needs to get in place and needs to ensure exist so that the industry can commit, because these projects are many years in development and then many years in building, and then obviously many years in operating afterwards. And one of the other areas we touch on in OGCI is the storage resources. We've done a lot of work there, but it's very important to be able to make sure that we have enough storage resources. And the take-home message from OGCI is we have enough storage resources, but we still need to refine them and get further detail and appraise them further so that we can link those with real projects on the ground. So back in 2020 approximately was we announced these hubs, and we realized, okay, they're all sort of centered in North America and Northwest Europe, and another one we had in China. So we decided, well, why aren't hubs happening elsewhere? Why aren't they organically coming to the forefront? So we decided to look around the world, looking at emitters, looking at stores, and try and say, okay, well, how much is it's going to cost for CCS to start in these countries? You know, what is the barrier? Is it a technical barrier? Is it a cost barrier? Is it a political barrier? So we started looking at technical economic costs of doing CCS and hubs, and we also had a qualitative overlay looking at the political arrangements and whether there's policy and frameworks in place, etc., etc. So we had a quick look around the world, and the countries coloured in blue and green. The only difference there was we did one to sort of pilot test the model running of this, and then the blue, which is a follow-on for the rest of the world. But we looked around each of these countries, trying to establish where in these countries hubs could be by looking at the complete range of emitters, and then also linking them with stores in country, most of the time in country. Occasional exception where we had to look outside of country for obvious reasons, where small countries may not have enough storage capacity, and then shipping was involved. But that was a special add-on sort of module to the more generic global search that we had here. And this is a very informative study. If I go to the next slide, I'll give you a quick overview of where we saw. So each of these circles here was effectively a large CCS hub. And there's different colors there indicating the sort of the minimum cost to kickstart that hub. So what would be those anchor tenants, and what would be the cost to allow those anchor tenants to deliver CO2 into the storage reservoirs that we had identified for this particular study? And the green ones are basically quite low cost, potentially less than 50 tons, $50 per ton. So very attractive to look at. However, we've got to get that to the store side, and that's sometimes pretty difficult. There are other tier levels there that are indicated, yellow being up to about $100 per ton, and tier 3 over $100 per ton. So we looked around the world and we identified quite a significant number of hubs, over 50, that we think we could possibly look at and see that as developing at relatively low cost, which is really exciting to sort of understand that. One of the key other messages was because of the way that we were looking at the study, it was all publicly available data. There seemed to be a sort of a limitation on storage, or at least the publicly available storage options that were limiting in places like South America, parts of Europe, the Far East, Korea, and Japan, whereas there was a surplus of storage in places like the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and North America. Now, those are just general trends because that's what's available in the public domain as far to storage reservoir storage resources go. And again, this slide goes into additional work that we've done looking at just that storage resources, where it's simple to say, oh yeah, we've got so much storage in this country, it's X million tons. But if you look at a different source of information, it may say, well, actually, it's over 100 million tons. And there's a difference in storage capabilities between different authors and different sources. So we've developed what's called the Storage Resource Management System with the SPE. And effectively, we've gone through and classified the different storage resources in a set taxonomy so that everyone understands exactly what we say. And therefore, it's very translatable now from industry speak to the financial governance speak, so that the banks understand how well understood the storage resources are that are linked to that project. Now, a lot of projects right now don't actually have storage particularly linked to them. Obviously, we hear about the Northern Lights, which is great. But we've been around the world to sort of start to assess these. In the next few months, we'll be adding the rest of Europe that you see is sort of empty here, and the rest of the countries around the Mediterranean. That's an important update for us that will go ahead in the next few months. And each of the dots represent basically a site or a formation that we have publicly available data on. And of course, this is fully accessible to the public. You can come on OGCI's website and download this information and compare it. Even better, you can send in a study that you may have done and help us basically update the site by giving us the information in the study so that we can integrate it into this global overview of storage resources. What we've also done is working on the earlier work of our hubs, which was all looking at technical economics. That's available on the internet as well on our website. That we launched a slightly different website, CCUS hub. And basically, we've also integrated this into this an ever-evolving playbook on CCS hubs. Looking at the beginning, we're looking at non-technical aspects of how to develop hubs. So really looking at a lot of the political and stakeholder engagement issues that we've come across, trying to gather all those lessons together so that we can give people an idea of what you need to do to start a hub and to make a hub successful. We are looking at integrating technical learnings. Obviously, there's lots of technical learnings published around the world at various sites, but they're disparate amongst the varied governments and or storage projects. We want to try and bring those together under one umbrella, and this playbook website where we're going to be doing that. But yes, fully quite interactive. You can go down, bear down into these sites, look at the technical, economic, and the MAC curves for each of the hubs that we identified previously. And what else are we doing? Well, we're looking at developing what we call white papers. So we've already published numerous ones. The UK is not mentioned here, but we did one a long time ago in the UK. But more recently, we've worked on countries like Saudi and the Gulf Cooperation countries all around Saudi, Egypt, Brazil, and China. We've published those results, and we're currently working on one for India and some countries in the APAC region. So the idea there is to really understand this CCS value to the government and where the government might want to look at which policies are the best to be implementing in that country or that region, given historical implementations of various policy incentives and policy frameworks for other technologies. Understanding the storage resources in a bit more granular detail, and also the emitters in a bit more granular detail, looking at what might actually come in the future, so things like blue hydrogen, blue ammonia. If there's that development potentially in the country, that could be a really important delivery of CO2 for storage. So these are our white papers that we're working on. We're also looking at other aspects about how the international trade may happen through Article 6, particularly through carbon storage units and what might be referred to as the carbon storage obligation. We have previously, a long time ago, published a policy mechanism support paper, and that was back in 2018 before any government had really deployed any policy mechanisms. And now we've had almost 5 years. We're looking to review this paper and see, well, what is the state of the art of policy now? How well have these policy mechanisms we previously lauded as potentially useful for stimulating CCS, how have they worked in real? Because around the world, CCS is very different and the policy mechanisms driving them are very different. So again, we're trying to lessons learned that we've seen around the world. And I think I'll stop there. And yeah, I need to, that's some backup slides for further information. But yeah, that's the end of my quick presentation, and I'll be handing over now to Aslak and his presentation on the Northern Lights.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much, and good day all. My name is Aslak Hellesø, as I've been presented as. I work in Northern Lights as a business advisor, looking also after internal and external affairs and government relations. It is a pleasure for me today to present to you where we are with Northern Lights and a bit of an insight into what we do and how far we've gotten. For the keen eye, it's also a pleasure for me to, if you can see in the background of my webcam as well, that I am indeed at our site with our CO2 jetty just behind me and our loading arms, which will in a year's time hopefully start and be operational to receive the first CO2 ships. So truly a testament to how far we've actually gotten with something very real. We are very busy here today at site trying to get ready for 2024 and starting operations, but we are also very busy preparing for tomorrow, which is a day where we will kick off our 6th annual Northern Lights Summit. So if you'll indulge me, I'd also like to encourage you all to check out our LinkedIn profile and register for that summit, which will be streamed live from site, which will be quite engaging, I hope. Now, I think most of you might know a bit or two, a thing or two about the CCS value chain and potentially also where Northern Lights sits in that value chain. But please allow me also to briefly summarize. So what we do, Northern Lights, is that we are the first one out to commercialize and provide transport and storage of CO2 as an open source discriminatory service. And that is what makes us special in the first place. And there's many more coming after, and that's fantastic. As the true innovation here is really not about the pieces of the puzzle, but how we puzzle all together into a value chain. What we do is that we will come with our fleet of ships and pick up the industrial emitters already captured and treated and liquefied CO2. We will transport that to our onshore terminal, to our hub, where we will offload the CO2 into temporary storage before we pump it some 110 kilometers offshore into our subsea wells and then into our reservoir 2,600 meters under the seabed for permanent storage. So that is what we do. That's what kind of boxes in our business model. Now, we originally emerged from what is known as the Longship project, which is the Norwegian state's project which sought to demonstrate the viability of a full-scale end-to-end CCS value chain, which coupled both emitters and a transport and storage provider in one funding scheme, demonstrating that it could be done at scale. And I think the key innovation in this theme was and scheme was that the Norwegian state put themselves into a de-risking position, making sure that the interfaces really fit between the different parts of that value chain, where I think is where we've stumbled in the past trying to kickstart CCS for many false starts across the world. It's a funding scheme which set out to support the capital expenditure of both the emitters and us as a storage and transport operator, but also to provide support for the first 10 years of operation, but at no revenue. So in very simple terms, it was a negative economic case, but it also provided additional capacity in that funding, allowing it to be sold commercially, and thereby also helping kick off a commercial CCS business, which we've been quite successful at doing, and I'll get back to that. So, but as part of that Longship project, we will store CO2 from Heidelberg Materials Norcem Brevik cement factory in Norway, as well as Oslo Celsio waste incineration plant. Now, how far have we gotten? Just a quick scan at what our infrastructure really looks like, and the hub piece of it, if you will. So of fixed infrastructure, and I'll get back to our ships, which is a very key infrastructure piece as well. We have an onshore terminal in Øygarden, just northwest of Bergen, Norway, where we have a single pipeline offshore to our 2 wells. We've got one primary well and one backup well for our phase 1 development. And then we have a neat system where all our well controls are routed via a separate field and platform west of us again to our wells, and thereby we are able to save some costs. So it's a relatively straightforward system. So for the invisible offshore piece, we have our 2 wells drilled, they're completed, we have the subsea hardware in place, connected to the controls, and it's ready for commissioning and testing actually this fall in just weeks from now. We also have roughly 50% of our pipeline, which is some 55 kilometers, already installed between the midpoint of the route and to the wells. And our last 55 kilometer section of pipeline will be installed next year and hooked up to our site. Looking then at the actual hub, this is a very recent picture showing where we are today. And I'd like to also extend an open invitation to any and all of you online as well to come see this. It's quite open and available to anyone, and it does make an impact to see this in live. But in total, our onshore and offshore facilities are already nearing 90% complete. It's bits and bobs basically across the board that is remaining in terms of hooking up controls and signals and some power and some bits and bobs across the board essentially, and drying out the system and then making it ready for CO2. We have an administration and visitor center, which you can see to the left, which is essentially where I'm sitting today and talking to you. We have our jetty with our loading arms. We have our onshore temporary storage. We have injection pumps in place. And we have, which is quite key as well here, we have an area already prepared for future expansion. So we have a hub, we have an onshore facility which is catering for expansion. And that's really key because there's a large portion of the capex really goes into this piece here. So we will be ready for operation in 2024. Just a year from now, we'll receive our first ship on site, and the site will be ready to take that on board. Then for the shipping piece of the puzzle, this is really an imperative part of making CCS fly and making CCS work. We are setting out to transport liquefied CO2 from industrial emitters in Europe by ship. And that shipping system enables us the flexibility and the scalability to really adapt and adopt to the different emitters' sizes and capacities and wherever they may be situated in the primarily northwestern part of Europe, and allows us to scale from small to large volumes and with time. It is also a fairly low emission CO2 transport solution. We are using medium pressure ships, 7,500 cubes. They're the largest of their type in the world being built right now, but we will certainly look to build bigger ships as we progress on and tackle bigger emitters. They're LNG fueled. We have wind assisted propulsion and air lubrication. We've got 2 ships on the way being constructed in China in Dalian. They're more than 50% complete, on schedule for 2024. And we have a 3rd sister ship also ordered now just recently in August for delivery second half of 25. And there will be more ships to come as the customer need demands. Then just a quick look at what is the potential, and then this may be very well known for some, and for some others maybe not so. But from our view, I think it's really key to emphasize that in establishing a CCS market, we need to recognize CCS as a regional solution to a global problem, meaning that for CCS to really have the climate combating effect that it has the potential to have, that it needs to have, we need to look at it across borders to have a sufficiently large market to manage and work with, and ultimately in the end, hopefully a liquid market as such as well. We are seeing in Europe in particular an increased momentum and support. We're seeing here and there and everywhere basically that that there's an acknowledgement that CCS is an absolute must alongside many other tools get to a net zero society, and that there's a strong not only an interest or desire, but an actual demand and pull for our services. But it's difficult. It's most certainly difficult. Of the most pronounced challenges is, for instance, the ability to establish the first of its kind contracts for transport and storage. We are trying to set contracts for us and for our customers, which is very long term. The contracts also involve quite significant investments for both us and for our customers. And they also inherently have uncertainty with regards to the business driver and the ETS and everything that really underpins why we, the emitters, go for CCS in Europe. But all in all, I think we're making headway, but it is difficult because there's no analogs and go by. So it's a bit of trying to strike a natural and sound balance between risk and reward. There's also an element of streamlining and adapting the regulatory framework. I think we are coming to realize, or many are coming to realize now that CCS has all the known and familiar building blocks as any other conventional oil and gas development, if you will, seen from the naked eye. But it's very far from that in every other way than the physical piece. And the very commercial foundation for it is quite difficult and different, meaning that we need to be more agile and adapt that way so that we can also serve our customers. There's, of course, a natural need for the bilateral agreements to allow transport of CO2 across borders. One thing for the London Protocol, another one reason is for the UN and the ability to report according to the Paris Agreement. And we're seeing that is moving, but it's moving slow. And finally, we're seeing that the chicken and the egg dilemma is still very much prevalent in terms of making that final step into this market with the capacities and the infrastructure needed on both sides, on both the emitter and storage side. But the good and equal, most of all, bad news is that there's plenty of CO2 to manage. And from our view, supported by Rystad and a study we did less than a year from now, we saw that from the hard-to-abate industries alone in Europe, there's more than 300 million tons per year of CO2 emissions going to air, where CCS is the only way to tackle it, really. And if you include other sources like hydrogen and others, that number is significantly higher. So there's plenty of CO2 to tackle. We just need to get at it. And we're doing our part, and then I think others are following suit very much so. So that's really great news. But we have been able to make some headway. I mentioned that we have 2 sites in Norway, the Norcem Brevik cement factory and the Oslo Celsio waste incineration. We are also successful in getting into an agreement with Ørsted in Denmark earlier this year for their bioenergy plants for 430,000 tons of CO2 annually. And we also have an agreement with Yara and their ammonia and fertilizer plant in the Netherlands at their Sluiskil factory for 800,000 tons of CO2 annually. So combined, we have 4 emitters, 4 off-takers, representing 4 different types of emissions and industries, which is really, really great as well, showcasing the diversity. and all in all, we've with that filled the first phase capacity of Northern Lights. Lastly, I just wanted to leave on a bit of a short note on public engagement, which is very much a relevant topic in this forum as well. It's part of part of the mandate we have with the Norwegian state, and part of how the state realizes its benefits from the supporting of us is through us then transparently sharing experiences and knowledge. And we do that in many different ways. One, through making concept and feed reports available online to everyone to download, as well as well and drilling data. We also actively participate in conferences and roundtables and forums and so on. But one of the most impactful ways that we do public engagement is, as I alluded to earlier, is through welcoming people to our site for them to sort of kick the wheel and feel what a real CO2 plant looks and feels like. And where I'm sitting here today, we've welcomed now nearly 6,000 guests to our site to date. And that's a site that's not even operational, from more than 48 countries around the world, ranging academia, politicians, government officials, industry, and more. It's just really, really impactful, and we do see how that bears fruits. And with that, I think I say thank you and pass on the word.
Thank you, Aslak. Arthur, I'll pass over to you to moderate the Q&A session, please.
Okay, thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Aslak and Ian. It's a great presentation. I think I learned something new every time I looked at a Northern Lights project presentation. So I have several questions already. People who are asking about, for example, emissions. What kind of measurements, if you will, or monitoring that you might have to do for leakage of some kind, especially of course in the surface? What kind of emissions monitoring will you be doing?
So we have quite an extensive monitoring program stemming all the way from the point that we pick up the CO2 all the way into storage and then in storage and beyond. So basically what we do, we measure what we take on board our ships. On our ships, we do a continuous measurement live every 15 seconds for the journey when the CO2 is on the ship until it gets to our onshore site, where we also again measure it as we offload it by physical accuracy. And then it goes through our temporary storage onshore before into the wells via flow meters and then into the storage. As for the storage, so we have in short, we have a very robust end-to-end mass balance overview. But in storage then, the question really is, how can we then say that we have permanent and safe storage? So we do a multitude of things. One of the primary things we do is that we use seismic. So we do a baseline. We've done a baseline seismic survey already of the field, so we know what it looks like, and we will do one shortly after starting injection, and then we will do another one 4 years after, and another one sometime after that again. So we have planned for successive seismic acquisitions or surveys where we will essentially see how the CO2 moves and the CO2 plume moves in the subsurface. In addition to that, we do continuous pressure and temperature monitoring, and we use that to history match our subsurface models, and we do some well injectivity testing as well on a regular basis. And by doing that, we will quite easily see if there's a correlation between what happens in real life and with the models we have in place and how we predicted they will be. And if something's off, then we have certain measures that we can initiate, including a reactive seismic survey to see where the CO2 is moving. So quite a few measurements and monitoring elements in place.
Great, thank you, Aslak. I have a commenter here asking about something. Well, it's not about emissions or leakage, but more about the subsurface, again, about subsurface itself. Are there contingency plans for additional wells, to do something about to modify the capacity of storage? Anything like that in the plans?
So for now, we have a fairly conservative approach, meaning that we have 2 by 100% well capacity, meaning that we will be able to inject theoretically 100% of our capacity in one well, but still we have drilled and completed an additional well to cater for the uncertainty in injectivity and uncertainty with regard to reliability and so on. Rarely do you do this, and you rarely do you do that in a margin business as CCS, but we have done so at least now to start off with until we get operational experience, and hopefully we can reduce some of that. So if 2 is not enough, then we'll have to reassess, but that should be plenty sufficient based on our insights.
Great, thank you. I have a question, a commenter here who's interested about the business models, and I think this question perhaps Ian could address first, and maybe something specific from you, Aslak. Ian, a question here about business models in terms of hubs around the world. What kind of lessons have we learned so far, or any experience in dealing with cement and steel and other heavy industries? Anything that you can describe there for us?
So reading the question, I think perhaps it's getting at the fact that we should be utilizing a green and bringing that into fact. So a green premium, by that I mean that we have a product, whether it's cement or steel, it's in its production, it's used CCS to reduce the carbon intensity of that product, and therefore you can sell that product at the normal cost, or you can charge slightly more because you have a green premium. You have that ability to say to the person purchasing it, actually the carbon intensity of what you're buying is lower than what's available at the market. And that is a very powerful notion. It's getting a lot of traction now, but this is very difficult to sort of implement. There's really not very much of a green premium market out there to date. There are some cases. I think aluminium has one, particularly because it's being produced by using renewables. There's a lot of aluminium linked in with renewables in various parts of the world, but also public procurement is one of the ones that we're always pushing towards, helping to develop this market. And actually, if the state, if the government can say, actually, our massive infrastructure projects that we have, whether it's building roads, hospitals, schools, or wherever, if on balance, if we can use 10% of green products in these materials, we'll have that pool, that market pool to help deliver CCS in these hard to abate sectors. And so, steel is an expensive one to apply CCS to. Cement has different cost profiles depending on which part of the process you're looking at. But certainly, I mean, the trouble with doing that within a CCS hub in itself would be that would drive the cost up potentially overall. And we're trying to deliver these at the moment at as low as cost possible because of the price differential right now between that and other decarbonisation levers.
So a quick follow-up to that, Ian. As a way to perhaps reduce costs, have we seen in our hub study any lessons learned yet about using existing infrastructure, decommission oil and gas infrastructure, or any kind of existing pipelines? Any of that could be helpful to hub development? Yeah,
so there's a large drive to look at potentially reusing some of the existing oil and gas infrastructure. And you've got two real components to that. You've got the reservoirs, so your depleted oil and gas reservoirs. Now, they do bring quite significant cost benefit if we can use them because they're well surveyed. They've got lots of geotechnical data. We know them very well. The seals have worked for a long time previously. but that also introduces risks that we've also got some wells going straight through them, and therefore they introduce some slightly other risks from that perspective. And not all reservoirs will be possible to be used because of what is the pressure and temperatures that they are basically being abandoned at. But then there's the infrastructure, the pipelines, etc., and the top sites, and all the available infrastructure for manning these sorts of installations. Those are potentially transferable to CO2 use, but not them all. CO2 has particular properties that normal oil and gas would not make them usable for. Particularly, it's very corrosive compared to normal oil and gas, shall we say. But there are oil and gas fields that have these more corrosive components to them, and therefore they basically are built to withstand them. So there's lots of screening to be done first, and there is cost savings there. Certainly, we already know that those reservoirs exist and are very useful. And then onshore, obviously, not only is the pipeline, if you can't use the pipeline, what you can potentially still utilize is that right of way. And by that, I mean where the pipeline is coming ashore and where it's going on into an industrial facilities or a group of facilities. You have a certain area where you have a right of way for that pipeline. If we can reuse those rights of ways, they can be very beneficial for the industry.
Great, thank you, Ian. Let me maybe come back to Aslak. The issue of safety. I've not been to Northern Lights. At least one of my colleagues have done that. What kind of community outreach did you have to do to advance this project? And by that, I mean also around safety, not only integrity of storage, but just safety of the surface facilities itself. We talked about leakage earlier already, but just about safety, operational safety, risk, and all that.
No, thank you for that. So we've had quite an extensive engagement with the local community. That being said, I think we need to recognize that where we are starting already on a good foot with this society and this local community here already having benefited greatly from existing oil and gas terminals in the area. And it's relatively rural in that regard. So this business existing already is already seen with positive eyes in terms of driving the community and labor and so on. So I think with us coming into this, we've started on a good foot. But ever still, we are implementing some relatively significant changes in not that large scale, but ever still. But we've had very good feedback. And what is really nice and as well is that as part of making ready the land for us to construct, we've also been able to, or the municipality has also made available land next to us for synergies and for new businesses. And even today, actually, just up the road here, some 200-300 meters away from us, there was a pilot plant for hydrogen production with inbuilt CO2 capture that was opened and the ribbon cut. So that's kind of a testament to the synergies that you can also have with someone like us establishing here. So all in all, it's been very positive. But then, of course, you also need to look at the safety aspects and also do a bit of a storytelling. So what is the actual risk of CO2 in general, but also relative to conventional energy businesses and oil and gas? And with that, we've done a lot of studies as to the impact locally if we have an underside event, and there's a bit of a fact telling about what is the effect of CO2. Locally, it's primarily there's two primary effects. One is essentially that it's displacing oxygen, so there's a choking hazard, and secondly, it's very cold. So you can also unfortunately freeze to death if you're close by. But beyond that, it's a very local effect from a safety perspective. Still undesired, but from a safety perspective, then we have good safe areas and zones around us.
Great. Thank you, Aslak. Very informative. There's a commenter here who wants to understand a little bit more about the business model for not only for bioenergy, CCS, but also I would say this could be extended to direct air capture. How would we include direct air capture and bioenergy into a CCUS hub? And Ian, in answering this, maybe if you can draw some lessons learned from the study that you presented, that might be very helpful.
Yeah, and so the study that we looked at didn't really look at including BECCS and DACs because there's not a lot of that happening right now. And what we were wanting to do was look at how can we stimulate projects as quickly as possible and get those hubs up and running as quickly as possible. But BECCS and DACs is very interesting. It's really at the forefront of a lot of discussions. In the next few days, there's a big meeting, the EU group of experts to talk about how do we actually start to integrate BECCS and DACs into the EU system. So the EU system is the ETS effectively, and trying to understand how can we incorporate these negative emissions through what they're calling a carbon removal certification framework. How can we integrate that into the ETS currently or future, or what other mechanisms could be evolving, some kind of carbon bank, etc. So this is really at the cutting edge of policy of how to incorporate both BECCS and DACs. That's from a regulatory perspective. And if you go to the US, for example, it doesn't matter where the CO2 comes from. As if you're putting CO2 subsurface, you'll get the 45Q credit. Again, that's a regulatory sort of stimulus. But if you look at the voluntary carbon markets, that's where right now there's a lot of development in all the voluntary registries about creating various CCS, BECCS and DACs methodologies. So how can they actually be able to claim carbon credits and sell them on the voluntary market by developing these projects? Because BECCS, in effect, you have either the income generated from the power that you're generating from burning the biomass, or from the biomethane that you're selling due to the production of the biomethane. There's lots of different types of BECCS that are there. I've just mentioned those two. So you've already got one income revenue stream coming in. It's about selling that negative emissions aspect and getting that into the market, which will be novel. And DACs only has that negative emissions, but it's very valuable because that's a technical solution. And lots of industries are saying, actually, this is one we're very interested in. And more the BECCS is the biogenic CO2. And perhaps that should be reserved for other industries and other aspects to utilize that source more so than the DACs. And what else is there to say? Yeah, so does the same CO2 credits and prices apply? Well, again, you're looking at two different aspects. BECCS and DACs are what we call carbon removals as opposed to emission reductions. They're two very different things. And we have to be working really hard to remove our emission reductions and get that down to basically near zero, if not zero. And then we can start to utilize various other offsets such as BECCS and DACs to counter any residual CO2 that's produced, or is this basically hard to abate for some sectors? Hopefully that answers your question.
It does, Ian. Yeah, it does, Ian. What the commenter is asking, it's I think if I could follow up on that very briefly. So the kind of policies that new hubs could be looking for, or even the ones that we just talked about, Northern Lights, what has been the most effective in terms of really helping to scale up? Both you, Ian, and Aslak can certainly address that. About policy enablers, what has been most effective so far, and what do you think could be very effective for other hubs?
If I can just take one half a step back and just complement what Ian just elaborated on as well, and say that I think ultimately what we see from a Northern Lights perspective on business models and in terms of driving this forward, we on our business model is very simple in many ways. It's purely providing a service that has a certain cost and risk associated with it, and we do that from an end to end, and ultimately it is to then supply that service based on someone's need, and that need needs to be substantiated by XYZ business model, and that either it being carbon removals or emission reductions. And I think indeed targeting emission reductions is the most impactful one, but also in a nascent market, having the mix of carbon or emission reduction and carbon removals, because we see a lot of interest there and for certain and capital going into there, I think is very healthy. But I think in Norway and for Northern Lights, it's been instrumental to have a government in the first place that really took the step out and looked at the de-risking the value chain. I think it's been many false starts, many in the past, and for once we've had an end-to-end value chain being de-risked and established with spare capacity to also allow others to come in. And then, of course, in Europe, we're quite fortunate because we have a regional incentive scheme or with the EU ETS, basically, which has its faults as well. But I think we are maturing that quite effectively.
Great, thank you.
If we add in, please.
Yeah, so from my perspective, on a global sort of scale, there is not one silver bullet policy that's going to deliver hubs. Each region will be different. But what is critical, what is driving success in these hubs, is policy permanence. And by that, I mean a government sets out to do one thing and it's not going to change in 3 or 4 years' time. Seen of that recently is in Denmark, where they laid out their CCS strategy, they got the funding sorted out how they're going up, and they're giving the certainty to industry to say, we will commit to CCS. And having that drive and that commitment is excellent. When there's lots of stopping and starting, and we're not too sure, or there's this, they've committed, but it's not quite as much as everyone needs to make it happen, it sort of drags things on. So really, this sort of policy permanence is something that's really critical to driving CCS hubs, and they'll be driven quickly when that policy infrastructure is correct.
Great, thank you. And given what you just said, do you have we seen you or OGCI, have we seen other regions that are very promising and could enter this whole momentum and really create a strong momentum for other regions to adopt their regional hubs? Have you seen other regions doing that, or at least hear of something like that?
I think what I can pitch in here is that we are. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead,
please. No. I just wanted to pitch in. I think we just wanted to share that we are increasingly seeing interest, especially from the east, coming to Northern Lights and to Norway in general to learn about the regulatory and regional schemes that are driving the CCS business here. So I think we're seeing a very clear trend towards wanting to develop regional structures around this. Sorry, Ian, for butting in.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Aslak. Ian, anything further from you? No?
Yeah, you can see different regions really jumping on and saying, right, devise a local strategy and what are the best policy frameworks for us to deploy, whether that be in China, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East. These are places where we've got large emissions. There's a drive to control these emissions, and there are industries that they have localized. They need to start to move on these emissions, and therefore they're really starting to drive this forward per ton of CO2 first projects, and they're developing them in a staged way. But as soon as perhaps more the West and the US and Europe start to deploy more and more CCS projects, I think we'll see the pace in other parts of the world, even in Africa, and certain countries in Africa will also pick up, as well as when the EU starts to kick in and starts to just for those countries to get their products in, they need to be lower carbon intensity products, and one way to do that is through CCUS.
Great, thank you. And there was a little bit of glitches in in the audio, but I think we get the idea, and it's certainly I think many of us share the optimism that this momentum is indeed very strong, and that we would like to see more of these regional hubs sprouting in different parts of the world. So thank you both, Ian, and thank you, Aslak. A very informative presentation. Now, I'll hand it back over to Daryl Martin. Daryl?
Thank you all. That was really interesting to listen to, first of all. Just before we end the webinar, I just want to thank the audience for attending, asking questions. I also want to thank our fantastic speakers and moderators. And finally, our webinar partners for their support. So yeah, we'll end there. Thank you very much. Goodbye and take care. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.